On July 22, 2011, Norway experienced its deadliest attack since World War II. What began as an ordinary summer Friday would become etched in history as one of Europe's most devastating lone wolf terrorist attacks. The perpetrator, Anders Behring Breivik, would forever alter the landscape of Norwegian society and challenge the nation's fundamental beliefs about safety, tolerance, and democracy. Anders Behring Breivik was born on February 13, 1979, in Oslo, Norway, into what appeared to be a middle-class family. His early years were marked by family instability that would later be scrutinized by criminologists seeking to understand the origins of his radicalization. Breivik's parents divorced when he was just 1 year old. His mother, Wenche Behring, worked as a nurse, while his father, Jens Breivik, was a diplomat who later moved to France. The absence of a stable father figure and what some experts described as an overly protective relationship with his mother would later be analyzed as potential contributing factors to his psychological development. As a child and teenager, Breivik appeared relatively normal to outside observers. He attended Oslo Cathedral School and later Hartvig Nissen School, both prestigious institutions. However, beneath this veneer of normalcy, troubling patterns were already emerging. Teachers noted his argumentative nature and his tendency toward grandiose thinking. He struggled with academic performance and social relationships, often feeling like an outsider among his peers. During his teenage years, Breivik became involved in the graffiti scene and later claimed membership in various gangs, though the extent of this involvement remains disputed. What is clear is that he began developing a worldview that positioned him as superior to others and increasingly resentful of what he perceived as societal injustices. Breivik's journey toward extremism didn't happen overnight. In his early 20s, he attempted various business ventures, including a diploma mill operation and later a farming enterprise. These largely unsuccessful attempts at achieving wealth and status left him increasingly frustrated and bitter. It was during this period that Breivik began immersing himself in online forums and extremist literature. He became particularly drawn to anti-Islamic sentiment and what he termed cultural Marxism, a conspiracy theory claiming that liberal academics and politicians were deliberately undermining Western civilization through multiculturalism and immigration. The Internet provided Breivik with an echo chamber where his radical ideas could flourish unchallenged. He spent countless hours on forums like Stormfront and Document.no, absorbing and eventually contributing to discussions about immigration, Islam, and what he saw as the decline of European civilization. His online persona began to reflect an increasingly militant stance against what he perceived as threats to Norwegian and European culture. Breivik's worldview was also influenced by various right-wing extremist writers and bloggers. He read extensively about historical events, particularly focusing on the Crusades and other periods of Christian-Muslim conflict. This reading reinforced his belief that Europe was under siege and that drastic action was necessary to preserve Western civilization. By 2009, Breivik had begun serious preparation for what he would later describe as his operation. He started work on a 1,500-page manifesto titled 2083, a European Declaration of Independence, which outlined his ideology and served as both a justification for his planned attacks and a call to action for like-minded individuals. The manifesto revealed the depth of Breivik's radicalization and his meticulous planning. He wrote extensively about his belief that Europe was being colonized by Muslim immigrants with the complicity of what he termed cultural Marxists, politicians, academics, and media figures who promoted multiculturalism. He argued that violent resistance was not only justified but necessary to prevent what he saw as the inevitable Islamic takeover of Europe. During this period, Breivik began the practical preparations for his attack. He registered a company called GeoFarm, which provided him with a legitimate reason to purchase large quantities of fertilizer, a key component in making explosives. He also rented a farm in Rena, Norway, which served as both his base of operations and a place where he could experiment with bomb-making without arousing suspicion. Breivik's planning was remarkably thorough and methodical. He researched bomb-making techniques extensively, drawing information from various online sources including Al-Qaeda training manuals. He conducted test explosions on his farm to refine his techniques and ensure maximum destructive potential. The target selection process revealed Breivik's strategic thinking. He identified the government quarter in Oslo as a symbol of what he saw as Norway's traitorous political establishment. The Labour Party, in particular, was viewed as the primary architect of Norway's immigration and multicultural policies. His secondary target, the Labour Party's youth camp on Utøya Island, represented to him the indoctrination of young Norwegians into what he considered dangerous ideologies. On the morning of July 22, 2011, Breivik put his plan into action. Dressed in a police uniform and fake identification, he drove a van loaded with approximately 950 kilograms of explosives to the government quarter in central Oslo. The bomb consisted primarily of ammonium nitrate fertilizer mixed with diesel fuel and aluminum powder, a combination known for its devastating explosive potential. At exactly 3:25 p.m., Breivik detonated the bomb outside the main government building. The explosion was massive, creating a crater several meters deep and causing widespread destruction across multiple city blocks. Windows were shattered in buildings up to a kilometer away, and the distinctive Y-block building, which housed several government offices including the Prime Minister's office, was severely damaged. The bombing killed 8 people immediately and wounded over 200 others. The victims ranged from government employees to innocent bystanders who happened to be in the area. The explosion sent shockwaves through Norwegian society, as such attacks were virtually unprecedented in the peaceful Nordic nation. Emergency services responded quickly to the scene, but the scale of destruction was overwhelming. Firefighters battled blazes in multiple buildings while paramedics treated dozens of wounded civilians. The normally bustling city center was transformed into a scene of chaos and devastation reminiscent of war zones in distant countries. As news of the bombing spread, initial speculation focused on international terrorist organizations. Many assumed that Al-Qaeda or a similar group was responsible, given the scale and sophistication of the attack. This assumption would soon prove tragically wrong, as Breivik was already en route to his second target. While emergency services were still responding to the Oslo bombing, Breivik was driving toward Utøya, a small island about 40 kilometers northwest of Oslo. The island was hosting the annual summer camp of the Workers' Youth League, AUF, the youth wing of the Norwegian Labour Party. Approximately 600 young people, mostly teenagers, were attending the camp along with adult supervisors and security personnel. The camp was traditionally a place of political education, debate, and recreation, everything that Breivik despised about what he saw as the indoctrination of Norwegian youth. Arriving at the ferry dock around 5 p.m., Breivik presented himself as a police officer conducting a security check in response to the Oslo bombing. His police uniform and official demeanor convinced the ferry operator to transport him to the island, despite some initial skepticism about his credentials. Once on Utøya, Breivik's deception continued. He was met by Trond Berntsen, an off-duty police officer working as security for the camp. Breivik claimed he needed to conduct a security briefing with camp leaders about the situation in Oslo. Berntsen, trusting Breivik's apparent official status, began walking with him toward the main building. At approximately 5:20 p.m., Breivik suddenly drew a pistol and shot Berntsen at point-blank range. This marked the beginning of what would become one of the most devastating mass shootings in modern history. Armed with a Ruger Mini 14 semi-automatic rifle and a Glock 17 pistol, both legally purchased, Breivik began systematically hunting down the young campers. The attack on Utøya lasted approximately 72 minutes, during which Breivik moved methodically across the island. His tactical approach was coldly calculated. He used his police uniform to lure victims closer, claiming he was there to help them evacuate safely. Many of the young people, already frightened by news of the Oslo bombing, initially trusted the man in uniform and approached him directly. The island's geography worked against the victims. Utøya is relatively small, measuring only about 10.6 hectares, with limited places to hide. The surrounding waters of Lake Tyrifjorden were cold, and many of the campers were poor swimmers. Some attempted to escape by swimming to the mainland, and while many succeeded, others drowned in the attempt or were shot while in the water. Breivik's methodology during the shooting was particularly chilling. He would call out to hiding victims, claiming to be police there to rescue them. When they emerged, he would shoot them. He showed no mercy to those who begged for their lives, including wounded individuals whom he executed with close-range shots to ensure their deaths. The psychological impact on the survivors was immense. Many witnessed friends and fellow campers being killed before their eyes. Some played dead among the bodies of their peers, lying motionless for over an hour while listening to ongoing gunfire. Others hid in buildings, bathrooms, and behind rocks along the shoreline, desperately trying to remain undetected. Communication from the island was limited, hampering the emergency response. Many of the victims tried to call for help using their mobile phones, but the overwhelming number of simultaneous calls strained the emergency services' capacity to respond effectively. The first police units didn't arrive on the scene until nearly an hour after the shooting began. The police response to the Utøya shooting has been subject to significant criticism and investigation. The initial confusion caused by the Oslo bombing delayed the response to reports from Utøya. Additionally, the police's lack of immediate access to boats and helicopters to reach the island contributed to the extended duration of the massacre. When police finally arrived at the island via boat at approximately 6:25 p.m., Breivik's attack was still ongoing. However, upon seeing the police approaching, Breivik ceased his shooting spree. In a surprising turn of events, he laid down his weapons and surrendered without resistance. The arrest was remarkably anticlimactic given the magnitude of his crimes. Breivik calmly raised his hands and allowed himself to be taken into custody. He showed no emotion or remorse, treating his arrest as merely another phase of his mission. This composed demeanor would characterize his behavior throughout the subsequent legal proceedings. The full scope of the tragedy at Utøya became clear as police and emergency services began their grim work. 69 people had been killed on the island, with ages ranging from 14 to 51 years old. The majority were teenagers who had been attending their first or second youth camp. An additional 33 people were wounded, many seriously. The combined death toll from both attacks reached 77 people, making July 22, 2011, the deadliest day in Norway since World War II. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate victims, affecting families, communities, and the entire nation. The investigation into Breivik's crimes was one of the most extensive in Norwegian legal history. Police had to process massive crime scenes at both locations while simultaneously investigating Breivik's background, planning process, and potential connections to other extremists. Breivik was surprisingly cooperative during the investigation, providing detailed accounts of his preparation and execution of the attacks. He seemed proud of his accomplishments and eager to share his ideology with anyone who would listen. This cooperation, however, was strategic rather than remorseful. He viewed the legal proceedings as a platform to spread his message. The question of Breivik's mental state became a central issue in the case. Norwegian law requires that defendants be mentally competent to stand trial and be held criminally responsible for their actions. 2 separate psychiatric evaluations were conducted, with conflicting results. The first evaluation, completed in November 2011, concluded that Breivik was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia and was psychotic during the attacks. This finding would have meant he was not criminally responsible for his actions and would be sentenced to compulsory mental health care rather than prison. However, this conclusion proved controversial and was challenged by a second psychiatric evaluation completed in April 2012. The second team of psychiatrists concluded that while Breivik had narcissistic and antisocial personality disorders, he was not psychotic and was therefore criminally responsible for his actions. The conflicting psychiatric evaluations reflected the difficulty in understanding and categorizing Breivik's mental state. His actions were clearly the result of a severely disturbed individual, but the question remained whether this disturbance constituted legal insanity or simply extreme criminality motivated by radical ideology. Breivik's trial began on April 16, 2012, in Oslo District Court. The proceedings were closely watched not only in Norway but internationally, as the case raised important questions about terrorism, extremism, and the limits of free speech in democratic societies. From the beginning, Breivik used the trial as a platform for his ideology. He pleaded not guilty to the charges, claiming that his actions were justified acts of war against what he characterized as traitors to Norway and Europe. His opening statement included a fascist salute, immediately setting the tone for what would become a deeply disturbing courtroom drama. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of Breivik's guilt, including his own admissions, physical evidence from both crime scenes, and testimony from numerous witnesses. However, the central question was not whether he committed the crimes, which he readily admitted, but whether he was mentally capable of being held criminally responsible. Throughout the trial, survivors and family members of victims provided powerful testimony about the impact of Breivik's actions. Their accounts painted a picture of unimaginable trauma and loss, contrasting sharply with Breivik's cold, ideological justifications for his crimes. Breivik's own testimony was particularly disturbing. He showed no remorse for his actions and continued to advocate for his extremist views. He described the victims not as innocent children and young adults, but as legitimate military targets in what he characterized as a civil war. This dehumanization of his victims was consistent with his written manifesto and revealed the depth of his radicalization. The trial also included extensive examination of Breivik's planning process, mental state, and ideology. Expert witnesses testified about various aspects of the case, from bomb-making techniques to the psychology of lone wolf terrorists. The proceedings provided unprecedented insight into the mind and methods of a domestic terrorist. On August 24, 2012, after deliberating for several days, the court delivered its verdict. Breivik was found guilty on all charges and declared mentally competent at the time of the attacks. The court rejected the first psychiatric evaluation's conclusion of psychosis and instead accepted that while Breivik had severe personality disorders, he was criminally responsible for his actions. Breivik was sentenced to 21 years of preventive detention, which is the maximum sentence under Norwegian law. However, this sentence includes the possibility of indefinite extension if he is still considered a danger to society. Given the nature of his crimes and his continued advocacy for extremist violence, it is highly unlikely that he will ever be released. The sentence reflected Norway's commitment to its rehabilitative justice system, even in the face of the most heinous crimes in its modern history. While many criticize the relatively short maximum sentence, the preventive detention provisions ensure that public safety remains the priority. Breivik expressed disappointment with the verdict, having hoped to be declared insane and therefore vindicated in his belief that Norwegian society was itself insane. His reaction revealed his continued narcissism and lack of genuine remorse for his crimes. The July 22 attacks fundamentally changed Norwegian society in ways that continue to resonate more than a decade later. The immediate impact was an outpouring of national unity and a recommitment to democratic values. The phrase, "more openness, more democracy," became a rallying cry, representing Norway's determination not to let terrorism undermine its free society. However, the attacks also forced Norway to confront uncomfortable truths about extremism within its borders. The fact that the perpetrator was not a foreign terrorist but a native-born Norwegian with a history of expressing extremist views online raised questions about monitoring and preventing domestic terrorism. The response of Norwegian authorities and society was widely praised internationally. Rather than responding with increased security measures or restrictions on civil liberties, Norway doubled down on its commitment to openness and democratic values. This response was seen as a model for how democratic societies should respond to terrorism. The attacks also had a significant impact on political discourse in Norway and across Europe. The Labour Party, which was directly targeted by Breivik, had to grapple with the fact that their political positions had motivated such extreme violence. However, they largely maintained their commitment to immigration and multicultural policies, refusing to be intimidated into changing their democratic platform. For the survivors and families of victims, the healing process has been long and difficult. Many have become advocates for tolerance and democratic values, working to ensure that Breivik's message of hatred does not gain traction. Their resilience and commitment to positive change represents perhaps the most powerful repudiation of his extremist ideology. The case of Anders Breivik provides important insights into the phenomenon of lone wolf terrorism and right-wing extremism. His attacks demonstrated how online radicalization can transform individual grievances into devastating violence, and how extremist ideologies can motivate seemingly ordinary individuals to commit extraordinary crimes. Criminologists and terrorism experts have extensively studied Breivik's case to understand the process of radicalization and identify potential warning signs. His progression from mainstream conservative views to extreme violence illustrates the dangerous potential of online echo chambers and extremist propaganda. The case also highlighted the challenges facing law enforcement in monitoring and preventing lone wolf attacks. Unlike organized terrorist groups, individuals like Breivik can plan and execute attacks with minimal external communication or support, making them extremely difficult to detect and stop before they act. Breivik's extensive use of Internet resources for both ideological development and practical preparation has led to increased focus on online extremism and the role of social media platforms in spreading radical content. His case contributed to ongoing debates about the balance between free speech and preventing the spread of dangerous ideologies. The international impact of the attacks was also significant. Breivik's manifesto was distributed globally and has been cited by other extremists as inspiration for their own attacks. This has led to increased cooperation between international law enforcement agencies in monitoring and combating right-wing extremism. Since his imprisonment, Breivik has continued to advocate for his extremist views and has attempted to use the legal system to spread his message. He has filed numerous complaints about his prison conditions, claiming that his treatment violates his human rights. These legal challenges have been largely unsuccessful but have provided him with continued media attention. Breivik's prison conditions reflect Norway's commitment to human rights even for the most serious criminals. He is held in relative isolation for security reasons but has access to education, recreation, and communication under strict monitoring. This treatment has been criticized by some who believe he deserves harsher punishment, but it reflects Norwegian values about human dignity and the possibility of rehabilitation. Despite being imprisoned, Breivik has continued to try to influence political discourse and inspire other extremists. His letters and legal filings often contain ideological content, and he has attempted to establish connections with other right-wing extremists both in Norway and internationally. The challenge of managing Breivik's continued extremism while respecting his legal rights illustrates the ongoing difficulties in dealing with ideologically motivated criminals. His case has contributed to discussions about how prison systems should handle terrorists and other extremists who remain committed to their radical ideologies. More than a decade after the July 22 attacks, Norway continues to grapple with their legacy. The immediate response of unity and recommitment to democratic values has largely been sustained, but the country has also had to adapt to the reality that it is not immune to extremist violence. The attacks serve as a powerful reminder of the destructive potential of extremist ideologies and the importance of vigilance in protecting democratic societies. They demonstrate how individual grievances, when combined with radical ideologies and access to weapons and explosives, can result in catastrophic violence. For students of criminology and terrorism studies, the case of Anders Breivik provides crucial insights into the psychology of mass violence, the process of radicalization, and the challenges of preventing lone wolf attacks. His methodical planning, ideological motivation, and lack of remorse make him a particularly important case study in understanding domestic terrorism. The memory of the 77 victims continues to influence Norwegian politics and society. Their deaths were not in vain if they served to strengthen democratic institutions and promote greater understanding of the dangers of extremism. The annual commemorations of July 22 serve as powerful reminders of the cost of hatred and the importance of tolerance and democratic values. Perhaps most importantly, the response to the attacks, both official and societal, demonstrated the resilience of democratic societies in the face of terrorism. Rather than succumbing to fear or abandoning their values, Norwegians chose to become more open and more democratic, directly challenging the goals of the terrorist who sought to tear their society apart. The story of Anders Breivik is ultimately a tragedy, a tale of how extremist ideologies can transform human beings into instruments of mass destruction. But it is also a story of resilience, demonstrating how democratic societies can respond to their darkest moments with renewed commitment to their highest values. In remembering the victims and understanding the perpetrator, we honor those who were lost while working to prevent such tragedies in the future. This case study represents one of the most significant domestic terrorism incidents in modern European history. The detailed examination of events, motivations, and consequences provides valuable insights into the nature of extremist violence and the challenges facing democratic societies in the 21st century. The legacy of July 22, 2011, continues to influence discussions about security, democracy, and human rights across the world.